You saw a cardinal. It wasn't migrating. It wasn't at the feeder. It landed close, stayed still, and looked directly at you. And you knew, in the specific wordless way that certain moments work, that it wasn't an accident. That it meant something. Maybe it happened right after the funeral. Maybe it was weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday, when the grief was quieter but still there. And the bird appeared. You didn't tell everyone. Some things you keep to yourself. But you didn't forget it. And some part of you has been wondering ever since. What you felt in that moment was not superstition. It was a response. And the science of what happened, all of it, is stranger and more precise than you think. This is what a cardinal actually is. What it does. What it detects. And why the moment you experienced was not an accident of timing. By the end of this video, you'll understand something that researchers have spent decades trying to quantify. Something about birds, about grief, and about attention. And you'll understand why so many people, across so many different cultures, across centuries, felt the exact same thing you felt when a red bird appeared after a loss. Stay with this. Because the answer is not what you expect. And it doesn't cancel what you felt. It deepens it. The northern cardinal is one of the most visually distinct birds in North America. The male's plumage is not red. It is precisely, structurally, aggressively red. That color doesn't come from pigment the way your shirt has color. It comes from the structure of each feather, microscopic layers that bend and concentrate light into that specific frequency. Scientists call it structural coloration. The same physics that makes a soap bubble iridescent. In the cardinal, it produces something close to the purest red visible in the natural world. That red is not decorative. It is a biological broadcast signal. Every cell in that plumage is functioning as a transmitter. The message, I am here. I am healthy. I am not hiding. Most birds survive by disappearing. They blend. They shelter. They become part of the background. The cardinal does the opposite. It refuses camouflage completely. A cardinal in winter, in bare trees, against snow, is visible for more than 300 yards. That visibility is a choice the species made over millions of years of evolution. It chose to be seen. In a world full of animals trying not to be noticed, the cardinal built itself to be impossible to ignore. That is not an accident. That is a strategy. The intensity of the male's red is directly linked to his health, specifically, to the carotenoid pigments he processes from his diet. A brighter red means a stronger bird. Which means that when a cardinal appears near you, that close, that visible, that still, it is one of the most physically vital animals in your immediate environment. Not a sick bird. Not a lost bird. A bird at the absolute peak of what a bird that size can be, choosing to be in your line of sight, at that exact moment. The cardinal does not migrate. When every other songbird has left your yard for warmer latitudes, when the yard goes quiet for months, the cardinal stays. All year. Every year. That residency matters. A cardinal in your yard is not a visitor. It is a resident. It knows your yard's geography, every branch, every feeder height, every shelter point, better than you do. It knows what changed. If a tree was cut. If a feeder was moved. If a person stopped appearing. Cardinals notice environmental changes with precision that researchers find remarkable. They remember locations for years. They remember what was there. They notice what isn't. The cardinal in your yard has a spatial memory that includes every version of your yard it has ever observed. Including the version that had someone in it who isn't there anymore. Including the mornings before the loss. Including the change in how the yard sounds now. A yard that used to have 2 people moving through it, 2 coffee cups on the porch, 2 routines, 2 sets of sounds, now has 1. Cardinals detect that kind of change. Not because they understand death. But because they are exquisitely sensitive to disruptions in pattern. Cardinals are creatures of deep habit. And grief disrupts everything about a yard's pattern. The sounds change. The movement through the yard changes. The scent of the outdoor space changes. The feeder schedule may change. Cardinals notice all of it. They investigate all of it. That investigation, that slow, deliberate approach to something altered in its familiar environment, is exactly what many people describe when they say a cardinal appeared after a loss. The territorial range of a cardinal is small. Typically 2 to 5 acres. That means the cardinal that appeared in your yard was not passing through. It lives there. It patrols that space daily. It knows your yard the way you know your own house, by feel, by smell, by sound, by what belongs and what doesn't. And it knows when something has fundamentally shifted. Most birds flock. Most birds spend nearly all of their time surrounded by their own species, for protection, for information, for warmth. Cardinals don't. Male cardinals travel alone. Not because they are solitary. Because they are territorial. A lone male cardinal is not lost. It is precisely where it chose to be, doing exactly what it does, claiming space, marking presence. That song, which carries up to half a mile, is not music. It is information. It says, I am here. I am healthy. This territory is occupied. I know this place. I am not leaving. And when the singing stops, when a cardinal lands close and goes quiet, that is a different behavior. Silence from a cardinal means something. It means it's listening. It means something changed. What do cardinals listen for? Everything. Other birds. Predators. Air pressure. Human voices. The specific acoustic signatures of the spaces they've memorized over years of living in one place. Researchers at Duke University and Ohio State have documented that cardinals respond to human emotional states, not by reading emotions, but by reading the behavioral patterns emotions produce. When you move slowly, breathe differently, sit quietly rather than moving through your yard with purpose, a cardinal reads that pattern change and responds with its own behavioral shift. Grief changes how people move. It changes their speed, their voice, their breathing, the frequency of their presence in the yard. It changes everything a cardinal is built to notice. This is not the bird sensing your pain. It's the bird detecting the disruption of everything it cataloged as normal in your yard. And disruption is something cardinals always investigate. That reflection tapping behavior, by the way, is well documented. Cardinals frequently tap windows. Their own reflection triggers a territorial response. But it also brings them to the glass. To the threshold. People in grief often describe the cardinal appearing at the window. Standing at the threshold between the outside world and the inside one. That is not coincidence. That is the bird's actual behavior. And the stillness. The thing people describe most, the way the bird stayed. Didn't spook. Didn't flee immediately. Just remained. That too has a specific scientific explanation. Cardinals have a flight initiation distance, the space at which they feel safe enough not to flee. In familiar environments, with familiar humans, that distance collapses. The bird tolerates proximity it shouldn't. If a cardinal stayed close, stayed still, held its ground while you were near, it wasn't broken. It wasn't sick. It was a bird that has been watching you long enough to lower its guard. That takes time. That takes the bird deciding repeatedly, over weeks and months of observation, that you are not a threat. That you are safe. That your yard is where it belongs. Which means that the moment the cardinal stayed close was built slowly, invisibly, over a long time, built before the loss, before the grief, before the morning it appeared and didn't leave. The bird had already chosen your yard. It had already chosen proximity to you. When the loss happened, it didn't come from nowhere. It was already there. Already watching. And it noticed. Not with empathy, with biology. With the detection system it was built for. Something fundamental had shifted in its territory. And it responded the way it always responds to change. Here is what the science cannot fully account for. Cardinals are territorial, yes. Cardinals investigate disruption, yes. But the specific timing, after a death, with that specific stillness, is anomalous. Ornithologists at Cornell's lab have documented what they call mourning behavior in paired cardinal bonds. When one mate dies, the surviving bird returns repeatedly to the last known location of its partner. Cardinals mate for life. When researchers tracked the movements of surviving cardinals after losing a mate, the birds returned, sometimes daily for months, to the precise spot where they last saw their partner. No researcher claims the bird is grieving in the human sense. But the behavior is identical: return to the site of presence. Return to the last place things were whole. Return and stay. What makes this anomalous? Cardinals do this in response to the loss of their own mate. But documented cases exist of cardinals showing the same return behavior after the death of a long familiar human. Not conclusive. Not peer-reviewed at the level that would make headlines, but observed, recorded, documented in field notes across decades of cardinal behavior research. Anomalous. Unexplained. Real. The cardinal keeps returning to where the presence was. Whether that presence was its mate, or a person it had catalogued as part of its landscape for years, the behavior is the same. Presence. Familiarity. Loss. Return. The cardinal doesn't have language for this. Neither in those moments do we. But the behavior, both of us, is identical. Let's go further into what the science actually shows about birds and death. Because there is more here than most people realize, and it changes the frame entirely. Birds process loss. Not metaphorically, neurologically. Avian brains contain structures functionally equivalent to the mammalian limbic system, the region responsible for emotional memory and attachment. Studies on corvids have been most rigorous, crows, jays, ravens, but the underlying neurology applies across passerine species. Cardinals are passerines. They have the architecture for emotional memory. What does emotional memory mean in a bird? It means the animal associates specific locations, specific people, specific patterns of presence, with states it has learned to call safe or unsafe. Over months and years, a cardinal that lives in your yard builds a detailed neural map of everything in its territory, including you, your rhythm, your routine, your presence as part of its world. When that node goes missing, when the morning routine no longer includes you in it, when a car doesn't return, when a voice stops, the map is incomplete. The bird investigates the gap. Researchers also know now that birds detect biochemical changes in their environment with extraordinary precision. Hormones released through human skin and breath during acute grief are detectable at distance. Cortisol. Adrenaline. The specific chemical signatures of a body under extreme stress, or of a body in the quiet, low-grade chronic stress that is grief after the acute phase passes. Birds use olfactory detection to navigate, to find food, to assess the health of potential mates. They are reading their environment chemically in ways we cannot consciously perceive. But the information is there. Which means, when you stood at the window or sat on the porch, or walked slowly through the yard in those days, you were emitting a signal. And the cardinal was receiving it. Not because it understood grief. Because it detected disruption, chemical, behavioral, acoustic, in a place it had mapped as safe. And its response to disruption is to investigate. To approach. To stay close. This is the biological scaffold underneath the experience you had. The machinery beneath the moment. The reason why what happened happened, without requiring anything beyond science to explain. And yet, the science explains the mechanism. It doesn't explain why you felt what you felt. Why the moment was different from every other bird on every other branch. There are moments that arrive with weight that exceeds their content. A bird on a branch shouldn't carry that much. And yet it does. And you knew it did, before anyone told you what to make of it. Across cultures that had no contact with each other, indigenous North American traditions, European folk beliefs, Celtic mythology, Chinese symbolism, redbirds appear in the mythology of grief and transition. Not because they borrowed the idea from each other. Because they all had the experience. A red bird appeared after a loss. The experience was common enough to become mythology. Common enough to be remembered. The Cherokee believed red birds carried messages between the living and those who had passed. The Ojibwe saw the cardinal as a spirit guide during mourning. These weren't decorative beliefs. They were responses to observed experience. In Christian tradition, the cardinal's red has been associated with the blood of Christ and with the presence of angels. A bird that doesn't migrate, that stays through death and winter, that appears when everything else is gone. None of this is what the bird knows. The bird doesn't carry messages. The bird is not a messenger. But the convergence, across every tradition that ever noticed this animal, is significant. People don't invent the same story by accident. What every tradition agrees on, the red bird in grief is a moment of contact. Not communication. Contact. The sensation that the membrane between what is here and what is gone became briefly permeable. You didn't invent that sensation. You didn't manufacture it from desperation. People who are not grieving don't look at cardinals and feel that. The context created the aperture. The bird filled it. The science gives us the mechanism. The mechanism is real. And the mechanism, a familiar animal, detecting the disruption of loss, approaching closer than usual, staying longer than normal, produces exactly the experience people describe. You were not wrong to feel what you felt. You were not projecting. You were receiving, imprecisely, through human senses that aren't calibrated for this, information that was actually there. The bird was there. It was closer than it should have been. It stayed longer than it usually does. Something drew it. Something held it. And something in you recognized that. You didn't imagine it. Here is the thing that changes after you understand all of this. You cannot unknow that the cardinal in your yard has been watching you. Not just that morning. For months or years. It knows the sound of your car. It knows your morning schedule. It knows which window you look through first. It has built a map of your life from its position in the yard. You were never unobserved. And when the loss happened and the pattern changed, and you stood at the window or sat on the porch with a weight that had no name, the bird was already there. Already watching. Already noticing. That is not a small thing. An animal in your yard that knows you, that built you into its world without your knowing it, that noticed when something broke, and came closer. You may never know why that specific bird came that specific morning. The cardinal doesn't explain itself. It doesn't need to. It was doing what it has always done. You were simply ready to notice. Grief opened something. A specific kind of attention, quiet, slow, unable to rush, that the rest of life rarely allows. And in that attention, the ordinary world becomes visible in a way it almost never is. The cardinal was always there. The relationship was always there. Grief didn't create it. Grief revealed it. And what was revealed, a wild animal that chose to be close to you, was worth seeing. You don't have to decide what the cardinal meant. You don't have to choose between the science and the feeling. Both are true. Both are incomplete. And both point toward the same thing, attention. If a cardinal appeared to you in grief, or if it appears to you now, in an ordinary morning you didn't expect to feel anything, I want to hear it. Leave it in the comments. Those stories belong somewhere. The cardinal is in your yard right now. Or it will be. Watching your window. Mapping your routine. Learning everything about the life happening inside. It has been doing this the whole time.